Hello and welcome to Radical Acts of Creating Ageing podcast. My name is Elizabeth Lynch, and with Arti Prashar, I am the co-chair of CADA, which stands for Creative Ageing Development and Agency. We champion the cultural contributions of older people and drive change for underserved and underrepresented artists, creatives, and their communities. So, radical. The dictionary defines the term radical as fundamental, to root out, and we want to explore what this could mean for the future of creative ageing. In this series of podcasts and zines, we invite a select number of artists and creatives to offer their reflections on what radical creative ageing is from a wide range of perspectives. This initiative aims to spotlight their inspiring insights for our network and help us identify how to support positive change at a national level. I'm delighted to be interviewing Sita Brand today. Now, Sita is a storyteller, a mindfulness teacher, and artist working with narrative as a tool for personal and cultural transformation. She was born and raised in the vibrant city of Bombay, India, or Mumbai as it's now called, and she grew up surrounded by the magic of stories. As the daughter of a librarian, her childhood was spent immersed in the world of books, reading, listening, and absorbing the tales that shaped her imagination. For over 30 years, she has shared these stories in libraries, schools, theatres, and prisons. Today, she's begun writing them down, ensuring that these narratives continue to inspire. Sita is the founder of Settle Stories, the Yorkshire Festival of Story, Storyversity, and Stories for Schools, each a celebration of the transformative power of storytelling. Quite simply, Sita says, I live and breathe all things story. So Sita, what first motivated you to have a creative career, and has this motivation changed over time?
Well, hello, Elizabeth, and it's lovely to be speaking to you here from a tree house in Kenya. I've always loved stories. I could be found by 798.2 in the folk and fairy tale section of the library. And I just grew up with stories and fairy tales in particular that kind of captured my imagination. To be fair, when I was actually wanted to be an astronaut. Now, we didn't have a television in those days, called it, but it was huge. It was like the size of a sideboard. And I remember that when the moon landing was taking place, and I wasn't allowed to stay up because I was too little, but I was very excited about this idea. And then I couldn't go to the moon in reality, physically, because I was not clever enough to be an astronaut. I could go in my imagination, and I could live on all kinds of places and explore the world through stories. And so I guess that's been kind of at the heart of it. I've had a rather eclectic career, and I spent some years, in kind of consultancy type of things, and also at the Arts Council. But actually, at the heart of it has always been this desire to share stories and for us to explore how we can understand each other better. And more recently, I have started a Substack called Storyteller's Compass, where I'm weaving in, the stories of today, of what's happening in the world, together with folk and fairy tale, to see what those folk and fairy tales can actually show us about the world today. I've been very, very influenced by Jung, even as a young child, I was influenced by Jung, although I didn't know it at the time. During the lockdown, I did a course in the art of archetypal fairy tale analysis. And as part of that process, I went back to books that I'd had as a child about myths and symbols, and things that I really, really loved and wanted, these special books, which I'd got from places like Strand Bookstall that no longer exists in Bombay. And there it was, all this about Jung, and Jung's approach to myth and the unconscious. And there's a way in which we are connected as people from around the world, through these folk and fairy tales. So I suppose that's what the kind of change has been, in terms of my greater understanding and recognition. But I think it's always been there, a love of stories.
And that's super interesting, because a lot of the stories that we know about, or that I'm thinking of now, are about the process of growing older. And there are archetypes of older people, some of which I know that you've challenged, and others which are extremely valuable and we've forgotten. But we might come to that later. I suppose that leads me quite nicely to the next question, which is, do you consciously challenge, I don't know if you have your own internalized ageism, do you challenge that in your creative practice, and what inspires you to do this? And if it's not your own internalized ageism, the ageism that maybe is present in the stories.
I'll tell you a little bit about a couple of pieces of work that I've done. Yes. Um, so folk and fairy tales, of course, show us all kinds of ways in which, uh, the older person is a wise person. And Buddhism, I teach Buddhism, and Buddhist practice. And, as a Buddhist, certainly you would say you were always a beginner, even when you're really old. But as you get how little you know and how big the world is and how much there is to learn and absorb. And I'll give you two examples. So one with the wonderful sculptor Shantamuni Budaya, who I brought over from India, and 30 of us artists altogether. Um, so there were ordinary people who was the person leading, running a local community group. There were people who were writers, someone who'd been a cook, someone who was a grave digger, and we were all sat, and I was one of them. And Shantamani would hand cast our hands as we clasped our hands together. And then we talked, and we talked about our lives. And people, ordinary people, have the most extraordinary lives. And we created this fabulous installation, which was these beautiful paper cast hands, together, hand cast, together with these videos which showed these incredible stories. And what we found as well, when local people came to the exhibition, was they were transfixed. And so often, I mean, I am guilty of this. You go to an art exhibition and you kind of see something, and you might look at a little bit of the interpretation or the write up about it, and then you just sort of walk past. And we're very much in this scrolling world at the moment. But people just stood transfixed in front of this sculpture, and they would say things like, "Gosh, I've known Martin for years. I never knew he was a gravedigger." And it's like all these wonderful stories that would emerge from these very simple, gentle conversations. And that project taught me an awful lot, about the extraordinary depth and range of the stories that we have within the Yorkshire Dales where I live, but also about a way of drawing out those stories. These extraordinary stories and life events kind of poured out. Um, And the other example is really about my mother. And my mother is 100. She is closer to being 101 than she's 100. And she started doing some art classes in her, I think she must have been 99 when she started that, but she wasn't very good at it. And so she gave that up. But she's had a passion for kind of history and studying and learning. And just before I came away, so last week, she was telling me about this group that she belongs to and how she was invited to give a paper about the art and culture of the Chola Empire, the 11th century Chola Empire. And she said, I don't know if I can do it. And I said, yes, Mum, you can. And there she is up at 2 o'clock in the morning, looking on Wikipedia, studying and finding out about things and looking at preparing to give her presentation, which may not be quite creating a piece of art in the same kind of way, but it's still being incredibly creative. And it gives me a real sense of gratitude that she's still with us, but also a gratitude that she's still living life so fully, so that hopefully, a month shy of her 101st birthday, she'll be giving her first paper about, art and culture of the Chola Empire. And the joy of the discovery, the learning, the finding out about it. So you're never too old to learn and to start to do something new.
Yes, a living challenge to ageism for you and for all of us. That's a fantastic story, Sita. Thank you. So, what does radical creative aging mean to you? I think you've already shone a light on that already with the story about your mum, but do you want to say anything more about that?
Well, I think what I said about the life in our hands in some ways answers that question, because I felt so privileged to be in this space, to listen to people sharing these incredible and extraordinary stories. Um, and over the last 10 years or so, we saved the W.R. Mitchell archive. And Bill Mitchell, as he was commonly known, he was a journalist and a writer and editor of the Dalesman for many, many years. And I came across his archive of cassettes. And I can remember when I met him, and he took me up to his room and showed me in his study all of these cassettes. And he was very elderly by then, in his 80s, late 80s, I think. And he would play me, a tape of perhaps Wainwright, or an interview with somebody who had known Beatrix Potter, or these kind of extraordinary stories. And so I'd worked to ensure that the archive was saved and didn't end up in a tip. Um, and that has been a kind of a privilege, that knowing these ordinary stories from the world around us. Recently, I'm here in Kenya because following up from a visit that I did last year, where we live streamed from from a cave in a cave which has the oldest human burial site in Africa, 78,000 years. And we live streamed a show, and the show included performance in terms of music, dancing, sharing, storytelling from the elders of the Mijikenda community, the local people here. We gathered these stories, as well as young people. The young people playing classical music and telling stories in different ways. And it was wonderful because at the end of the show, there was a kind of call and response. And it started, instead of it being the call and response, which is usually the elder is calling and then the young people respond, this was flipped. So there were young people starting with the singing call and then the elders responding. So that's very exciting. And we're hoping to bring out an EP of that later this year.
Fantastic. Thank you. What a great. Where are you in Kenya exactly? I missed that
So
area.
I'm in Kilifi, which is on the coast, Kilifi County, um, and I'm on the coast and by a creek. So I'm surrounded by trees, and it's a very eco place. So it's all powered by solar electricity, um, and living very simply. But you're visited by the monkeys and the bush babies. And last night I was feeding bush babies with bits of chapati.
Brilliant.
Connecting with colleagues, because I'm a few hours ahead, connecting with colleagues on the other side of the world in England, going, look, bush babies live. Come to the staff meeting room
Love
now.
to see some of those if we could. But I've got one more question. If you
Yes,
were to write or tell a story, even um, a
yes.
radical, if you were to write a radical creative aging manifesto, who would you write it for, and what would your first call to action be?
Well, I think that the thing is to write for people who don't think of themselves as storytellers. And lots of people feel like that they don't have a story to tell, and it's not true. We all do have stories to tell. So that's one. And I think that the there are lots of surprising stories that are within us that we sometimes don't share. And perhaps a call to action might be that, if you went to care home to ask the old people to tell you stories, instead of saying, can you tell me what you remember? It might be better to say, can you tell me what stories you've never been allowed to tell?
Mhm.
And I think that the art is to be able to ask people interesting questions so that they can start to open up and share things about their stories and lives that otherwise would be lost.
Mm. So, any more reflections, Sita? I know you've
Uh,
done a lot of some thinking about elders, growing older, staying creative. I think learning is important to you. And
I
I know that you've
learning
done
is
some very
absolutely.
interesting learning around AI recently.
I have, yes, and I just think that you can do all sorts of extraordinary things with AI. I think there are lots of challenges and difficulties, and I'm uh, reading a book at the moment called Code Dependent, which shines a light on some of the challenges that we're facing as a world and as a community. But I think to kind of run away from it is not a good idea. I think we need to understand the dragon. Um, so I've explored in all kinds of ways. I've used AI to be my theatre director for a show I was doing. So that's kind of like a weird way of using it. Um, and yes, very much for doing routine, mundane admin that I hate doing. It's terribly useful for. Um, and I think that there is an opportunity to learn and to learn in different ways. And interestingly, a friend and colleague sent me something just last night about a new platform that's opened up about how learning can be turned into a person specific experience, um, both in terms of its style and its approach, using new AI tools that are coming out. So I haven't explored this myself, but I intend to, because I'm interested to see what impact this might have on the way in which we learn as communities. We can never take away from, you know, sitting here in this tree house, feeding bush babies by the creek, listening to the sounds, the extraordinary sounds of the various insects and things that are around me, splashing in the creek and the boats, the fishermen going up the creek. Of course, those are wonderful experiences too, but but it's not possible for us all to be here, apart from the carbon footprint being impossible to bring everybody here. And so, this is what the digital world offers. And that's what I'm very interested in. And what was so wonderful as well about this um, show that we did last year, The Goddess in the Shadow, bringing, people from to this cave in Kenya that they could never have gone to experience something extraordinary that would have been impossible in so many different ways for so many different reasons. But it's possible that we can do this now, with these opportunities that the digital world offers us. Of course, we have to be careful, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't learn. And I think often, sometimes people think older people can't learn something. And as I've described with my mom, of course they can. You know, my mother uses email and YouTube and WhatsApp and all of these things, platforms. She's not using AI, but all of these kinds of things. But so it's possible, and I think it's the fact that we can keep on learning, and keeping on learning actually keeps us young. It keeps our minds awake and aware. And I'm always learning, always. I'm always doing some course or other, usually 2 or 3, and it enriches my external life, and it so empowers and enriches my internal life. And I think that makes for someone who's able to be more resilient and deal with whatever the challenges are that are facing us. And by heck, we're in a crazy world and there are an awful lot out there. So I think we do need to learn, and we also need to learn and see things from different perspectives. So, there's so much, particularly in the creative world, there's a lot of righteous anger about the whole AI thing and the feeling about work being stolen, etc. And I know what it feels like. I've had my own work stolen. Before now, I'm interviewing somebody once for a job, and they'd written down on their CV that they'd written a play that I'd written, and it's like, so I know that kind of thing happens. Um, and I can understand it, but I think that when we are able to face the beast, to look at what we may not like, to listen to the stories of those whom we don't agree with, who so that we are able to open our minds, and open our hearts, we can then make changes for both ourselves and other people by learning the different places and spaces that people are coming from.
That
I
sounds
think it's
like
all too easy for us to feel like. I was just saying, I think it's all too easy for us to think, that, I'm an environmentalist and a nice person, and I'm a Quaker and I'm a Buddhist, and, so one of the other books that I'm reading at the moment is, a book by Jacob Rees-Mogg. Now, I can't stand the man's politics, but I need to understand. It's not about trying to be somebody, but you need to understand why someone thinks the way they do. And that for me is also at the heart of it, about learning. And what aging gives you, and growing older, is the wisdom to know that you can hear differences, and you can still learn and understand from one another. Um, and can have incredible impact by simple gestures. Um, we've seen that, haven't we? All over the world in many different ways.
so. Just to sum up, I think it was really interesting. You've said 2 things that have resonated in terms of creative aging. It's about carrying on learning, but also what I'm hearing is how important for older voices to be heard in that space where there is this change, for example, with AI. And maybe we don't have to do all the training that you've done, but having a voice, getting some insights into the impact it's going to have on our society, and the older person's voice is very important to jump in and be part of the conversation.
Yes, because when we are part of that conversation, then we can, we're helping to formulate and to have an impact on what happens because of the questions that we ask. And we ask different questions from a younger person. And being older, I think it's very important that we ask these questions and that we don't feel as though we have to wait to be asked. I think we just need to have the courage to go and learn and jump in and get in there and get on with it. So much of this comes down to confidence as well. In the end, I'm coming around to thinking that so much is about confidence and how we feel. Sometimes as people get older, they can feel like, oh, I'm useless, I'm old, I'm finished. Hey, I think you're not, because you're a wise crone or a wise elder when you get older. And also, older people can have a wicked sense of humor. I'm going to finish with one little story of someone who told me that she was talking to an older woman who was like in her 80s or something. And she used to come and sit at this bench when the school closed and all the, 14 to 18-year-olds will be coming out of school, out of secondary school. And my friend asked her, why did she do this? And she smiled and she said, you see, you look at me and you think I'm 85, but inside I'm 40.
That's a great story. That was such a great conversation, Sita. Thank you so much for giving us your time today. And I look forward to seeing how the zine looks. Of course, we'll include all the links um, for the websites that you've talked about and some of the artworks that you've described. But thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your stay in Kenya. And I
I
look forward
will.
to seeing you in person in the near future. Thank you and
Yeah, that'd be good.
bye-bye.
Brilliant. Thank you.